Well done, Studio Trigger. You have fixed everything I disliked about the ongoing formula of Little Witch Academia with this single episode. You remember how I said I didn't like the repeating formula? For instance, like every episode kind of feeling very similar. Akko gets everyone in trouble, and at the end she doesn't really learn from her mistakes at all, but overall everybody ends up in even more trouble to begin with. That's kind of how every episode was. Well, with this episode, it tries to change that up, and I really love the difference of this episode. Now, obviously, it can't be a Little Witch Academia episode without Akko getting into trouble, but the way it's settled overall is very refreshing and different from the previous episodes of Little Witch Academia. For one, the reason why Akko is getting in trouble in this episode, honestly, you feel bad for her, because when you look at the previous episodes of Little Witch Academia, you're constantly looking at Akko and thinking, like, she deserves this punishment. She's the reason why they're all getting in trouble, and honestly, you really don't like Akko's character once you finish these episodes, because overall, it doesn't seem like she's learning, and she's constantly causing problems when she could easily avoid these problems. But with this episode, when you see Akko getting into trouble, you're on her side, because normally when I'm watching an episode, I'm not on her side, because I'm usually thinking, like, everything that's going on, she deserves it, and I feel bad for her friends around her because she's causing all these problems. But with this episode, the problems Akko causes makes sense because she's trying to learn. She's trying to learn from her mistakes, and she's trying to better herself as a witch for she could eventually, become like Shiny Chariot. And that is something I wanted from this series, and I'm glad Studio Trigger delivered on that aspect, because one of the big things that was missing from this series is Akko getting some form of character development, and it seems like the events from last week's episode actually carried over into this episode, and it played a huge role. It wasn't something that was just there to just show that Akko is going to get better. It wasn't just like that. It showed that Akko is now taking the initiative to make herself as a better person and a better witch, and also a better student. And even though all the teachers, they dislike her, you have it to where many of them are just expecting her to be shitty at, being a witch, or not knowing how to use magic, different things like that. They're constantly giving her like a D-, or she's a failure or whatever. She's still trying. Like, let's talk about how she was, going about trying to spend all night studying, when normally if we were going back 2 episodes ago, Akko wouldn't have done that. Akko would have easily went out to party, having fun, and wouldn't even thought about studying at all. But after the events of last week's episode, we see that Akko has now learned that to become a great witch, to become someone like Shiny Chariot, you cannot take the easy path. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a lot of, trial and revelations. You're going to have to go through a lot of problems and learn from these problems and mistakes you make in your life to become what Shiny Chariot was. And when she saw someone like her idol being able to overcome these problems, and they weren't, perfect to begin with, and they had so many issues they had to overcome, she realizes she needs to do the exact same thing, which is what she's doing in this episode. Studying, staying up all night studying, not wanting to party. She wants to take the initiative and learn. That's what I love to see and what I wanted from the series. And like I said, this episode corrects all of the problems I had with the series and makes me appreciate Studio Trigger for this episode, because in all honesty, if it would have continued the actual formula of Little Witch Academia for probably 3 more episodes, I probably would have dropped the series. Just gonna be point blank right now, because it didn't seem like Akko was really going anywhere as a character. It had a great world, a lot of potential, but it just didn't seem like anything was really going with what we had. But now it seems like Studio Trigger is taking the initiative to show that there is changes going on. And as we know, the previous episodes, they were setting up that there was bigger things going on, like, Luna Nova, how it's facing financial problems and all of that. It was kind of doing a lot of world building, which I respect Studio Trigger for doing that, because they were setting up a bigger plot later on down the road in the distant future. Still, you cannot just neglect the characters. You have to give characterization and development, which finally it seems like Studio Trigger is ready to do that. They're ready to dive into these characters. They're ready to give them development and characterization, and that's what we saw throughout this entire episode. Now, let's talk about the overall plot of this episode. So, besides Akko trying to learn from everything she's done wrong and trying to become a better witch, the episode starts off very similar to what we have seen. Or in this case, she gets into trouble, and all this trouble has finally started to catch up with her. Because of all the trouble she has caused in previous episodes, she's facing a situation where she might get expelled. But thanks to everything that happened this episode, instead of Akko being in even more trouble than she began with when it came to this episode, she actually was, the talk of the entire school. She was someone that saved the day and helped out, this fish species that was actually close to extinction. She managed to actually make the entire school look good. And so, instead of, Akko being someone that was constantly being put down or just showed an example like, oh, you shouldn't be like this person, she was actually someone that was being respected by everyone. And I loved how the conclusion of this episode was. It seemed like it was going to be a traditional conclusion, like she was going to get in trouble, but then it wasn't like that. She actually managed to overcome this and show that she is important. She does have things that she is good at, and she can learn, because at the end of the episode, she was able to understand fish. She was actually able to understand what the teacher was saying, which that is crazy. So Akko is learning, even though it's not practical, it's not something you would normally see a student trying to do to learn, she is learning. And you have to remember that each individual student are not going to be the same. It's kind of like how all teachers are. You got to remember, as a teacher, you cannot teach all students the same, and that's a concept many don't really understand. They think that every student should be taught the exact same way, and in all honesty, a lot of kids, they learn in different ways. Some kids might find this method a lot easier than this other method, and that's kind of what's going on with Akko. Akko needs hands-on experience. She can't just pick up a book and learn from it. She actually needs experience. She needs to actually see it firsthand to really learn how to use different types of magic, which we see in this episode. And obviously, since she's a new beginner, like she's a beginner witch, she's not going to be as, skilled as these other witches we see in the school that can do this insane amount of magic. Obviously, she can't do stuff like that because she is new. We started off with the series knowing that she was someone that was considered, like in Harry Potter world, she was like a muggle. She couldn't use magic at all. She was someone that had no skill in magic, but now she is learning how to do that, and now she is actually slowly getting better. And I mean, if you actually compare this Akko in this episode with episode 1's Akko, a vast improvement. Like, this is not the same Akko from the first episode. Just looking at the magic. I'm not even talking about the character. The character of Akko has definitely improved thanks to this episode in last week's episode. So, Studio Trigger, keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing with this episode. Don't make the same exact episode, obviously, because then you will once again have another problem. Repeated formula. However, I do like what I saw in this episode. I do like how Akko got some development, and also there was some development for a side character, another, I guess you could call the other character a main character too, Latte, how she got her goal of what she's trying to accomplish in the school revealed in this episode. How she's wanting to get a license to where she can modify, magic, tools and stuff, where she can handle them, fix them, do stuff like this. She needs a license, and that's kind of her objective slash goal. So this episode kind of set up in-game goals, and we do know Akko's in-game is to be more like Shiny Chariot and to make it to where people love and enjoy magic, but obviously other people are going to have different goals too. And we get to see a little bit of what Latte wants to do. She wants to be, someone that can handle magical equipment and fix it and probably make stuff and all that. And that's what we saw in this episode. So I appreciate that. I really appreciate what Trigger did with this episode, the little time they had with the 20-minute episode, and I want more stuff like this. I don't want the exact same thing, obviously, but I want more stuff like this. It's a very good step in the right direction for Little Witch Academia, and honestly, Trigger, for you to be able to make up for all the problems I had with the series with just this single episode, that takes a lot of talent, because when I usually have problems with a series, they usually stick with the series for a good long while, and they're not usually fixed. So for those problems to be fixed in this episode, my love for this series has grown. I really love Little Witch Academia now. It seems like Studio Trigger is being serious with this series. They're not trying to half-ass it from what I apparently see with this episode. Now we just need to see what they do with the next episode. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know how you felt about Ursula Sensei stepping up for Akko, trying to help her out, and having that teacher and student bond. I mean, how do you feel about everything that happened when it came to Akko learning and trying so hard to stay up late and learn things? I mean, how do you feel about everything that happened? I love you all so much. You have a wonderful day or night wherever you live. Please be safe. Chibi out.